I will tell you how I found her, because no one else was there who saw all of it, and I want the account to be accurate. The river had been climbing for 3 days. We knew it would take the mill bridge. The old stonework had been failing since my father's time, and the autumn rains that year were the kind that make the valley look like a gray sea from the ridge. My steward told me to leave it. The bridge was derelict. The undercroft had been empty for a decade. There was nothing to lose. My wolves were in there. 3 of them, young ones, 2 and 3 winters old, who had slipped their handlers at dusk and done what young wolves do in a storm, found the most interesting smell, and followed it straight into danger. By the time my riders reached the valley road, the bridge had half collapsed and the river was through the arches. They couldn't get close. They sent back a rider to tell me the wolves were gone. I rode out myself. I don't know why I needed to see it. A king who rides alone into floodwater in the dark is a fool, and I have been called many things, but rarely that. Yet I rode, because 3 of my wolves were in that water, and I could not sit in the hall and receive a report about it. That much I can explain. What I cannot explain is what I heard before I saw anything. I came down off the road where the bank had broken, and the water was spreading flat and shallow across the lower field, maybe knee-deep on a man, cold enough to make your bones ring. The mill ruin was 60 yards ahead, the old arch still standing but the near wall buckled, the whole structure groaning the way stone groans when it has decided to fall and is only choosing the moment. I expected to hear wolves. Distressed? Probably. Possibly silent. I heard breath. Not a wolf's breath, a person's controlled, deliberate, the specific rhythm of someone carrying a weight they have decided they will not put down. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Measured. I know that sound. I have heard it from my own men holding a line when they should have broken. I had not expected to hear it coming from a flooding ruin in the dark. I pushed the horse forward and ducked under what remained of the arch, and I saw her. The undercroft was still half standing, the downstream wall had gone, but the upstream side held, and the ceiling beam that ran the length of the room had dropped at one end, maybe 2 feet, maybe 3, until one corner of it rested on a figure standing in the water. She had both hands flat on the beam above her head, palms up, fingers spread, her whole body braced underneath it, and the beam was not falling because she was not letting it fall. The water was at her chest. She was soaked to her chin, her hair plastered to her face, and she was breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, steady as a metronome. My 3 wolves were on a dry ledge to her left. The ledge was barely a handspan above the waterline, but it was above it, and the wolves were there, pressed together, watching her with their ears flat and their eyes very wide. Alive, unhurt, watching her the way wolves watch something they have decided to trust completely. She did not look at me when I came in. Yours, she said. Her voice was level. She did not sound frightened. She sounded like a woman who had moved past frightened some time ago and arrived somewhere quieter. Yes, I said. Get them out first, she said. The ledge won't hold much longer. There's a gap in the far wall. The stones came down in the right order. You can get them through if they'll follow you. They've been good. They know to wait. I looked at my wolves. The largest one, Fen, a gray male I'd had since he was 8 weeks old, lifted his head and looked at me, and then looked back at her. He had been in floods before. He was not looking at me the way he looked at me when he needed rescue. He was looking at her. How long have you been holding that? I said. Get your wolves clear, she said. We can talk after. I got my wolves clear. She was right about the gap. She had clearly already assessed it before I arrived, probably tried to move them through it herself before the beam had come down on her. They went through in a scramble, and I waited after them, and the 2 riders I'd left on the road were there to take them. And Fen shook himself once and sat down facing the ruin, which meant he was going to wait for her. I went back in. She was still there. The water had risen another inch in the time I'd been out. It was at her collarbones now, and the beam had shifted. I could see from the angle of her wrists that she was taking more weight than before. She hadn't made a sound about it. The wolves are clear. I said, good, she said. I moved through the water toward her. It was waist deep on me by the time I reached her, cold enough that I felt it in my back teeth. She finally turned her head and looked at me, and I saw her face for the first time, pale from cold, composed, dark eyes that were assessing me the same way she had probably assessed the room when she arrived. Quickly, accurately, without sentiment. I'm going to take the beam, I said. It's heavier than it looks. I expect it is. She held my gaze for a moment, then she said, I'll move when you have it. I got my hands up alongside hers on the rough stone and wood of the beam, got my feet under me as well as I could in the mud at the bottom, and I took the weight. It was, as she said, heavier than it looked. It was the weight of a ceiling that had been trying to fall for the better part of an hour. I got it, barely, braced. felt every muscle in my back and shoulders disagree with my decision. She took her hands down slowly, watching me, making sure I had it before she let go. That was the kind of woman she was, careful, making sure before she trusted the weight to someone else. And then her hand, in coming down, brushed mine. I have tried to describe this to my steward and given up twice. It was not a sound, and it was not a light. It was the feeling of something I had been holding at a distance for my entire life, suddenly arriving in my chest, fully formed, as though it had always been there and I had simply been standing in the wrong room to feel it. Warmth, but the kind that comes from recognition, not from temperature, because I was standing in floodwater in the dark and warm, was the last thing I was. My wrist burned gold. Hers did too. I watched it happen. The mark that every Alpha Kings of Veldrath carries from birth, dormant until the fated mate is found. I had stopped believing mine would ever wake, blazed from dull gray to living gold in the cold water, and the same mark answering, lit on her wrist from nothing, the way a struck flint catches. She looked at it. She looked at me. I don't know what that is, she said. I do, I said. The beam was still in my hands. I was not about to drop a ceiling on her to have a conversation. Get out, I said. Through the far gap. I'm right behind you. She moved, no argument, no panic, just the same measured efficiency she'd applied to everything else. She waited for the gap in the far wall and went through. I held the beam until I heard her clear, then I set the weight as slowly as I could against the buckled wall and moved for the gap myself. Behind me, the beam finished its journey to the floor with a sound like a struck bell, and the downstream wall of the Undercroft gave up entirely and came down into the river, and then there was just the sound of water and my own breathing. I came out through the gap and found her on the bank, waist deep in the slower water outside the ruin. She was standing, not fallen. Her wrist was raised, turned toward the gray pre-dawn light, examining the mark. Fen was in the shallows beside her. He was standing very close to her, his shoulder against her hip, and she had one hand resting on his back without seeming to think about it. My two riders on the bank were watching all of this. I was aware of that. I was aware that how the next 2 minutes went would be the story they carried back to the hold. I waited to her. River, keeper, I said. She had told me nothing yet. I was guessing from what she wore and what she knew. Is that what you are? Issa, she said, her name, first, before she gave any title. That told me more than a title would have. Issa, I said. I am Karn of Veldrath. Those are my wolves. I said it plainly. Not to impress her. I think I already knew that impressing her was not the thing I was reaching for. I don't know how long you held that beam. Long enough, she said, which I believed. You held it for my wolves, I said. Wolves you didn't know, in a flood, alone. They were frightened, she said, as though this explained everything. Perhaps, for her, it did. I looked at her wrist. The mark was holding steady gold in the gray light, not fading. My own wrist matched it. I had read about the moment. Every Alpha King of Veldrath knows the old accounts. The mark wakes when the fated mate is found, and it does not cool, and there is no mistake. I had read it as a young man and thought, yes, and perhaps, standing in the river, muddy to the shoulder, watching it glow on the wrist of a woman who had just told me she held a flooding ceiling up for my wolves because they were frightened. I thought, of course it's her. Of course it was always going to be like this. The mark on your wrist is the mate mark of the Alpha King's line, I said. It means you are my fated mate. I don't tell you this to compel you. I tell you because you deserve the truth of what just happened, and you look like a woman who prefers truth to ceremony. I paused. I would like to bring you home to Veldrath if you'll come, but the choice is yours. It will always be yours. She looked at me for a long time. She was still breathing that careful, measured breath in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she had breathed under the beam, taking stock. Then she looked at Fen, who was still pressed against her side. Fen, who was the most particular wolf I had ever raised, who tolerated me and trusted no one else in 17 years of life. Fen, who was leaning on her like a pup. The wolves would be at Veldrath, she said. Yes, I said. She looked at her wrist once more. The mark was the color of the first light coming into the valley, just now, across the water. All right, she said. I have tried to remember, after, if I felt the mark blaze when she said it. I think I did. I think the river felt it too, because the sound of it changed in that moment. Less a roar, more a low murmur, the way water sounds when it has finished its work and is settling. Perhaps that is invention, but I do not think so. I spoke her name before my riders. I said, this is Isa, fated mate of the Alpha King, and she will come to Veldrath as its Luna by her own choosing. I did not say it in the voice I use for councils and proclamations. I said it in a voice I had not used before, quieter, and certain in a way that proclamation never is, because proclamation is a performance of certainty, and this was the thing itself. Both riders bowed without being asked. Fen sat down, which for Fen constitutes a formal ceremony of welcome. The other two wolves came and stood with him, and Isa looked at them all, at the three wolves she had held a ceiling for in the dark, and her face did something I would spend the next year learning to read. It softened at the corners, just slightly, and she reached down and let Fen press his nose into her palm. I have been king of Veldrath for 11 years. I have ridden into many things I did not expect, and come out the other side and filed the experience under the things a king must do. I did not file this one anywhere. I kept it out. I keep it out still. I found my fated mate in a flooding ruin at gray dawn, muddy and cold, with both hands holding up a ceiling for three wolves who were not hers. She did not know my name. She did not know the mark. She only knew that the wolves were frightened and that no one else had come. I think about that last part sometimes, in the way you turn a river stone in your hand until you know its weight. No one else had come. She had simply shown up, no rank, no advantage, no reason beyond the fact that the need was there, and held the thing up until help arrived. It is not a lesson I needed to learn about her. It is a thing I already knew, the moment I saw it, the way you know a truth you have been waiting for, without knowing you were waiting. She is my Luna. She has been, I think, since before either of us arrived at that river. I was simply the last one to find out.